We left off in the other video by making the display on at the beginning of this opacity section. So now we wanted to turn it off when the opacity video is finished or when the opacity section is finished and just before the next one starts. So we just simply put the playhead where we want, make sure that we click here to select opacity, and then we're going to turn this off, puts in a keyframe here. We'll do the same now for the X and the Y. In fact, I'm just going to pause this while I do that because I want to explain something better for the ones that show up. Okay, so what I've done so far is the opacity. The display comes on here, goes off here. Then for the X coordinate, turns on here, we see it, and then it turns off here. So the only difference is that we don't see them before they come up even off the stage. So right here you can see as soon as I slide over a little bit, it disappears. Then the next one, which is the Y coordinate, shows up, and then when it's finished, it disappears even from the area off the stage. So far none of that would really affect our final animation, but here is some stuff that it definitely affects. So right now we have two things showing up on the stage. So that's a problem. So all we have to do is go to our next area of animation, which is the text size, and then toggle its visibility. So playhead in the area that starts. Go over here, change this from, I might have got ahead of you here, it was set to always on. We want to change it away from always on to just simply on. Now what that does is it automatically means that we don't need to see it until it shows up here. Now it still looks like nothing was fixed, and that's because the next video after this, I keep saying next video, but I mean the next section of the animation. So let's cure one problem at a time here. Go to here. This is where the size gets really big, comes back. Park our playhead here. Go up to the visibility and change it to off. And then the latest one that we made is this text color. We'll repeat the same thing here. Now I want to stress something to you. Watch when I back up. You see how the text color, I can animate text color right here, is showing up before it should. As soon as we go over to here, change this to on, the assumption of the program is, well, if it comes on there, then it must be off everywhere else. So now problem is solved there. So the short of this is when you're animating in this style where you have one thing showing up after another, just simply turn on and off your different states. Now I'm not ready to turn this one off yet because I got to figure out how far it goes. So this section just takes up a total of 3 seconds. So we'll move out here to what represents 3 seconds, turn its visibility to off, and then we'll continue on with the next. Since we're just basically following through the properties panel and experimenting around, that brings us to letter spacing. So I have a named layer here for letter spacing in this text. Going to place the playhead at 20 seconds here. Click on that, move on over to a second later, click again to add a, oh, and it looks like it didn't take the first one, so let me try that again. Click again, there we have a starting and an ending keyframe, moving over to the ending keyframe, and I'll just do a scrub in here like that. And then we'll put that back to where it was by moving the playhead over here, clicking on again, and then adding a manual 0. So as you can tell, I'm going through this stuff a little bit faster. Don't want to be too redundant here. So if you don't feel like this is making sense, you probably would at this point need to back up and go through, some of the stuff. So I'll at this point just kind of move through, show you what we're doing and how I did it. We'll just stay in the habit of turning the display on when we start an animation section and turning it off when we finish that section. And the next one here for line height, just put a block of text in there and animated the change in height, which is this animal right here. And you can see that change as I scrub the playhead. Left that on for a total of 2 seconds and then switched over to word spacing. Left that on for 1 second and then adjusted the word spacing right here. And of course, toggling the visibility as we go. Left that on for 1 and switched over to this paragraph. And as I'm indicating here with my text, this is probably not something that you'd find a reason to animate. So just keep in mind, a lot of these things that we're changing in the properties, you would probably only change statically. If you decided that you wanted paragraphs with an indent rather than a space between them, then you just simply go over here to the properties for the paragraph right here and make that change, but probably not with transitions. Okay, now what I'm doing here is I'm into the transform option. So if you don't see them, they might be toggled shut. You just click here to toggle them open, and I'm just basically going through them one at a time. Just zoom down here or scroll down here. So there is your first one, doing a outward stretch, so you can see that's this one right here, going from 100% to a higher number and then back down, and then we play with this one here. And I'm just putting a reminder in there that generally stretching type is never a good idea. If it stretches and then resolves itself into perfectness, not stretch, that's fine. And then you can see here you have these options here that contort it, skew it, if you will. And then we go into the rotate, which is probably one that gets used or that you may use quite a bit. So I'm just going from when I clicked on the keyframe, made sure it was set at 0, goes to 180 degrees. So all you have to know when you're monkeying with this one is that 360 means all the way around, but it doesn't stop there. So if in 1 second you wanted it to go all the way around twice, then you would go in multiples of 360. So the next one would be 720. If you needed it to go out 3 times, get out your ruler and multiply 360 times 3, or not your ruler, but your calculator. So you can see that would go around quite a bit there. And then I pasted that information in here, which gave me another layer. That layer does not have any animation on it. And you may or may not have noticed that I have switched to a different file here. So my naming is a little bit different, but all I'm really going to be looking for is that you did indeed name them and give them a name that makes sense. And sometimes you might notice too here that some of my layers are bouncing around, but the normal flow is that it places each new layer over the top of the other one, which makes it nice. But this one I added later on, that's why it's so much further up than where I had been here. So normal flow continues there, but don't worry about the order of your layers. just that they make some kind of sense. Now we're up to the shadow. I'll go ahead and close some of these down here so we got a little bit more room here. Pop this shadow open. Oddly enough, the shadow is available here, and then it's also available under the filters. And I'm not sure if there's a significant difference in what you can do between the two of them. But my whole idea here was to have you play with a couple different things with the shadow. So as you can see, I'm monkeying around with the X coordinate of the shadow, then the Y coordinate of the shadow, and then next the blurring of the shadow. Which again, even if you don't animate a shadow, it's good to know those properties if you have the need for a drop shadow in your work. Okay, so then that takes us up to, I'm at 54 seconds here. So this showed up for 1 second after all these 3 different animations. And then all I'm doing next here is going through the filters one by one. Now these filters are obviously going to have more or less effect on what you're working on depending on what it is. So if you had a photograph in here and you were doing some of this stuff, it's going to be a much bigger change. So I'll just try to mention some of them as we go through here. So start out with this guy right here, and it's basically, you know, one by one. So invert just kind of makes opposite of the colors. Again, try that with an object that has more colors in it. You get a better idea. And all I'm doing is going out, you know, messing with each filter and then coming back, bringing it to its starting state. So next we have this hue filter, so that you could take any object and change its colors just by rotating through the different degrees of a color wheel. And we have this contrast filter. This would obviously be even more appealing with multiple colors on the screen as well. Then we have the saturate filter, and just keep in mind what saturation means is if you start with a super bright red color, that means that color is at full saturation. So if you backed off on the saturation, you'd get a duller and duller red until it became a gray. So same thing with a photograph with a bunch of different images. The more you bump up the saturation, like the greener the grass would be, the bluer the sky would be, and going in the other direction, you'd eventually turn it into a black and white photograph. And then here we are on to this sepia filter, which just is like dealing with an old photograph, adds that sepia tone to a black and white, so just a reddish, copperish tinge over the top of whatever you're working on. And then we are up to our grayscale filter, which is a little bit like taking the saturation out. And then we are up to our blur filter, which is pretty obvious what that one does. And then again, we have this drop shadow that I mentioned is located here as well. So this time what I did was I used the controls to make kind of an oddball drop shadow. I actually made the shadow green. So if you look over here, you can see there's your X, Y, the blur again, and then you could pick a different color for the background rather than the default black.